In the post-war history of the Middle East, a key role was played by one small country in the heart of Europe, Czechoslovakia. After the Second World War, up to 250,000 Jewish refugees passed through the newly liberated Czechoslovak Republic on their way to Palestine. In 1948, Czechoslovakia sent arms to defend the new Israeli state against Arab armies. Yet only 6 years later, the same country was sending arms to states bent on Israel's destruction. In the strategically important Middle East, the Cold War turned into a real war. Today, the Cold War is history, but the Arab-Israeli conflict still rages as fiercely as ever. Hundreds of thousands of Arab refugees still live in degrading conditions. Some think they can improve things by carrying out suicide attacks on Jews. Mutual hatred has meant the end of Jewish communities in Arab lands that have survived 1,000 years. In August 1967, a body was found in the river Vltava near Charles Bridge in Prague. It was that of a man who had been trying to help refugees in the Middle East. His name was Charles Jordan. 36 years on, the circumstances of his death are still a mystery. Within months of the end of the Second World War, a new conflict had begun, the Cold War. Soon this rivalry between the great powers would divide the world into two opposing camps. This war too had its heroes, men and women who risked their lives to help the afflicted and had the courage to deal directly with the enemy. Charles Harold Jordan was born to German parents in Philadelphia, USA in 1908. His early years were spent in Berlin, the Czech borderlands, and the Riesengebirge Mountains near the Czech border, where his wife came from. In 1933, Jordan was one of thousands of Jews who fled to Czechoslovakia to escape Nazi persecution. He spent nearly a year in Prague, where he survived almost entirely on humanitarian assistance. It was an experience that changed his life. In 1941, he decided to devote himself full-time to the refugee problem and got a job with the American aid agency, the Joint Distribution Committee, or the Joint for short. By 1948, Jordan was head of the JDC's emigration division, helping Jewish refugees to get out of Europe. Despite problems caused by the ever-growing political divide between East and West, he had considerable success. As representative of an American humanitarian organization, he had no qualms about negotiating on behalf of refugees with his country's ideological enemies. In 1949, for example, he made a deal with the Czechoslovak president Gottwald, allowing Jewish refugees from Hungary to travel through Czechoslovak territory. When the political show trials of so-called Zionists began, spreading fear among the remains of the Jewish population in Iron Curtain countries, Charles Jordan contacted the Hungarian Secret Service. Following the example of the Jews who had held secret talks with the Nazis in Budapest during the war, his aim was to persuade the new regime not to interfere with the work of Jewish aid agencies, in return for US dollars. Like his wartime predecessors, Jordan ran the risk of being branded an enemy agent and traitor.
Charlie was a visionary.
Ted Fader, born in USA, senior executive for the JDC, personal friend of Charles Jordan, lives in the USA.
How often in discussing what we were doing and relating to what happened during the war, he would say, "God damn it, Ted, If I were there then, things would be different. He came back to that time and time again. So in a way he was driven.
Thanks to his involvement in Jewish emigration, Jordan was labelled an enemy of the state in Hungary. He returned to the JDC's European headquarters in Paris, where he formed a new cover organisation to continue secret contacts with the communists. Cash remained a key element in these negotiations, as well as the supply of goods subject to embargo. Jordan became a Cold War go-between, repeatedly crossing the front line in his efforts to help displaced persons. But his efforts were not confined to the Jews behind the Iron Curtain. With the creation of the Israeli state, the many Jews still living in Arab countries suddenly felt under threat. Arab states avenged their military defeat by Israel with bloody reprisals against their Jewish populations. Even now, the details of Jordan's secret dealings with the Arabs could not be published without endangering the lives of those involved, given the implacable hostility between the two sides.
What constitutes a period during which one has to remain discreet about certain information is hard to say.
Daniel Lack, born in England, Jordan's legal advisor, lives in Switzerland.
There are always those who try to take political advantage of humanitarian activities in decrying those activities as being allegedly motivated on political grounds. Not so in this instance, where Jordan and the JDC team were concerned solely with saving human lives.
We still know virtually nothing about the individual contacts that enabled Jordan to help Jews living in Arab countries. Neither are we likely to learn much in the future, since all the participants were sworn to lifelong secrecy. However, we do have a unique account from an insider of plans to evacuate Jews from Syria.
And an attempt was made to see if the Jews could not be evacuated on one specific date, involving a well-known European airline, visas from countries like Colombia, like Canada. And all this was due to happen as a result of our negotiations over several months, involving my visit together with Charlie Jordan to Lebanon. And on a certain night, with the approval of the then ruler of Syria, the Jews were supposed to be evacuated. General Amin al-Hafiz was the then ruler, and certain negotiations were possible in which funds were provided from Jewish philanthropic purposes to purchase the freedom of Jews at a sum, as I recall it, was $350 per soul. Unfortunately, on that particular night, there was a coup d'etat, and this general was wounded, and all the arrangements were cancelled. The thing was dropped.
Where the Syrian operation failed, others succeeded, at least partially. The system of ransom payments for Jews was also used in Eastern Europe, where the price per head ranged from $120 to $300. But Charles Jordan's achievements went beyond his humanitarian work on behalf of the Jews. As an expert on repatriation and assimilation, Jordan was asked to take part in UN programs for refugees from Tibet and Burma. He also went on an official mission to war-torn Vietnam. Following his successes, he was awarded the Order of the Légion d'honneur, as well as the Nansen Medal for humanitarian work.
Jordan was a man of tremendous courage, completely unconcerned about his own safety. He would have done anything within reason if he felt it would favor the immediate program and save human lives. This, together with his involvement movement in and out of Arab countries, with movements in Eastern European countries, certainly got to the knowledge of intelligence sources, and there is no doubt that there were attempts to follow and track Charles Jordan wherever and whenever he went at a certain time.
I saw him as a real humanitarian. I saw him as a lover of people anywhere, everywhere.
Paul Kaplan, Jordan's nephew, born in the USA, trained as an aid worker, lives in Belgium.
I know that he got himself in trouble because he was using JDC funds and Jewish funds to feed Arabs in northern Africa. And he got in trouble apparently because there was a picture taken of Arabs eating in the Jewish kitchen. And I like that story because that's Charlie. He did not draw lines between people.
Which leads me to another engagement of Charlie Jordan, which was a sensitive and controversial one. He was very concerned about the Arab refugee problem as a result of the 1948 War of Liberation, and Jordan realized it was essentially a human and humanitarian problem, and said very, very simply, all refugee problems, as we know well in the Jewish world, are capable of solution.
When Israel came into being in 1948, most of the Arab population left Palestine. Some were escaping from war and hardship. Some believed their leaders' promises that they would soon return to their homes in triumph. Some were forcibly expelled in a policy which today we call ethnic cleansing. The Palestinian refugees quickly became hostages to international politics. An Arab League resolution that the only acceptable homeland for generations of displaced Palestinians was the territory of what is now the State of Israel, preferably after its destruction, has never been rescinded. Until then, the politicians have decreed they must remain in refugee camps. No Arab country is allowed to grant them citizenship or the right of settlement so that they do not lose their Palestinian national identity.
Tam je to rozhodnutí Arabské ligy. Žádný stát nemá oddělit občanství Palestinců.
Hassan al-Hamid, born in Syria, in his youth an Arab activist, studied in Czechoslovakia, former intelligence officer.
Bydlí v Syrii, dostane syrský pas pro Palestince, nebo v Iráku, nebo v Jemenu, nebo v Jordánsku, nebo v Egyptě. I v Libanonu nemají libanonský pas, nebo v Egyptě. Oni nedostali občanství. Aby ztratili svoji identitu jako Palestinci, aby snili a žili a bojovali, aby mohli se vrátit doma, kde tam se narodili. Oni bylo slíbeno, OSN i velké státy, že po válce bude mír a můžou se vrátit domů.
Most Palestinian refugees still live in closed camps without work or meaningful occupation and totally dependent on UN aid. It is a fertile breeding ground for hatred. In the mid-1960s, Charles Jordan, trusting in his own skill as a negotiator, decided to do something about it. Had he succeeded, he would have radically altered the very essence of the Israeli-Arab conflict.
There were then several hundred thousand, maybe over 1 million Arab refugees at the time festering in the camps because of Arab refusal to absorb them, to assimilate them for political reasons. The Arab refugee problem was used as a source of pressure, political terror movements, various terrible incidents that appeared taking their toll in the international community. And Jordan said this, with a goodwill, this problem is capable of solution. And he found an institute called, if my memory is correct, the Diogenes Institute, which was an institute based on social planning and did demonstration projects. They could show that the refugee problem could be solved in a number of years, essentially within less than a decade and over a generation, totally, by rehabilitation projects, agricultural training, livestock, seed, a plan of action in practical, professional, vocational training in various areas of the populations where they were to be found, speaking the same language, of the same religion, culture, identity.
By the mid-1960s, the Cold War was entering a new phase. While most of the world was by now aligned with one side or the other, the conflict in the Middle East continued. The superpowers, however, had little incentive to settle the Palestinian refugee question by brokering a genuine peace deal. As long as tension in the region lasted, they could justify their constant interference and military presence. In Europe too, the situation was changing. Economic necessity forced the Soviet bloc to open up to the West. This enabled Charles Jourdan to build a network of contacts behind the Iron Curtain. But now his agenda went beyond helping people in need. Given the frequent changes of regime in the Arab world, he saw the communists, with their solid connections in the region, as potential mediators for secret talks between Jews and Arabs. His aim was to negotiate the official return of the Joint to Eastern Europe, and then establish a working relationship with the communist governments.
We always came down to the same level. Money. Money. For example, in Romania, where we had 13 kitchens, the government sold us food at international prices. I think our budget was about $4 million. I had a little experience with Czechoslovakia, primarily because it was a small program, but still having the permission to send in money. That's the key. As long as we could send in money, they would also let somebody in, just look at the bills.
We know about Jourdan's dealings with the Czechoslovak authorities thanks to reports by agents working for the STB, the State Security Service, which in turn had found out all about him from their Soviet counterparts. The KGB's dossier was detailed and accurate, suggesting they had an informant very close to Jourdan. They described him as a man who had succeeded in establishing a network of underground contacts with Jews in Arab countries.
During the winter of 1966-67, I contacted Charlie.
Richard Rubinstein, born in USA, trained as an aid worker under Charles Jourdan, lives in the USA.
And I said that I was really interested and I wanted to know if they had either an internship or a job. And he said, sure, come and see me. And I met with him in his office in New York, and he laid out a trip involving 10 weeks, starting in Geneva, traveling through the Middle East, Beirut, Cairo, Tunis, Algeria, up through Western Europe, into Eastern Europe, to meet him in Prague in August, and then to come home. I asked him what kind of trip it was. He said, we'll tell you when you get to Geneva, but there'll be a lot of interesting things for you to do. But clearly it was not a tour. It was to meet people, to take messages. He did tell me that I'd be meeting people, that I'd be carrying messages in and out. I don't know what else was involved. Then in May, the end of May, when I showed up at his office at 9 o'clock on a Friday, and I'll never forget this, they told me that he was not there. I was to meet him at 1 o'clock in the attorney's office in Manhattan. I got to the office at 1 o'clock. They told me 3 o'clock, another office. At 3 o'clock, they told me the Plaza Hotel at 5:30, where I finally met him. And he said to me, there's going to be a war in the Middle East in a couple of weeks. And I looked at him and said, but how do you know? There's nothing going on. There's just a little rumbling of swords. How do you know there's going to be a war? He said, I know. There's going to be a war. You can't go. I said, what was the trip all about? He says, I can't tell you, but it was dangerous and it's impossible for you to carry out if there's a war.
Náletem izraelského letectva na letecké základny Sjednocené arabské republiky v ranních hodinách 5. června vyvrcholilo napětí na Středním východě vyvolané hrozbami Izraele Syrii. Tento náhlý útok, jímž začala izraelská agrese proti arabským zemím, zásadně ovlivnil další průběh bojů.
Izraelská agresia vyvolala mohutnou vlnu protestů v dalších arabských krajinách. V Tunise sa hnev obyvateľstva obrátil proti americkým a britským inštitúciám. Za izraelskou agresiou viděl celý arabský svět záujmy a priamu podporu vlád Spojených štátov a Veľkej Británie. Libanonskí nacionalisti zničili naftové nádrže britského monopolu Shell v Bejrute a zastavili dodávku nafty britským a americkým lodiam z naftového potrubia ústiaceho v prístave Banias.
Hlavní nápor izraelských vojsk byl veden proti Sjednocené arabské republice, především proti Gaze. Odpor arabských jednotek hájících Gazu byl zlomen nepřetržitým bombardováním. Izrael měl už také ve vzduchu naprostou převahu. 6. června padla Gaza, útočiště 300 000 arabských uprchlíků z Palestíny. Do 2 dnů byla dobyta celá jordánská Palestína na západ od řeky Jordánu s městy Betlém, Nablus, Tubas, Ramala a dalšími. Od té chvíle žije pod izraelskou okupací na 1,5 milionu Arabů.
Štyri dni bleskovej vojny sa nemôže stať precedentom pre ďalšie vojnové dobrodružstvá v iných častiach sveta, pretože každé ďalšie dobrodružstvo by sa mohlo premeniť v 3. svetovú vojnu.
The Six-Day Arab-Israeli War of 1967 marked the first major defeat of Soviet arms and strategy since the Second World War. Russian military advisors had not imagined that Israel would respond to Arab pressure by launching an attack. But the Israelis were also surprised at their easy victory. They had no idea what to do with all their new territory, nor with the tens of thousands of Palestinian refugees now confined to camps in Gaza and on the west bank of Jordan.
Came to Israel.
Sasha Gonik, born in the Ukraine, senior medical officer for the JDC, died in 2002.
A week later or was, Mr. Jordan arrived. He was staying in the same hotel. He called me into his room. He says, would you be able to work out a plan and administer the care for the Palestinian refugees? I said, modestly speaking, with the experience I had so many years in so many countries with different types of people, needs, and I believe I could. But then I said to him, you know, Mount Charlie, this is a very difficult political problem. The Palestinian refugees under United Nations protection, it is a window to the open world. And they are not going to give it up. And not only the refugees, but the Arab countries. And I don't know if it would be of the interest of the Israeli government.
Charles Jordan's plan was to integrate the refugees into Arab communities in territories formerly belonging to Jordan and Egypt, which in time would establish their own authority or autonomy. If his plan for the occupied territories proved successful, the same approach would be used for Palestinian refugees in neighboring Arab countries. But nobody liked what he was doing. Neither the Israeli right, who hoped to annex the occupied territories, nor the Arab leaders, who exploited the refugee problem for their own political ends, nor the two superpowers. But the main obstacle to Jordan's plan was UNRWA, a UN agency set up specifically to deal with the Palestinian refugees. For political reasons, UNRWA was opposed to any humanitarian solution that involved doing away with closed refugee camps.
I think at that stage, Charlie Jordan was interested in showing that their refugee heritage could disappear. Discussed it with the High Commissioner for Refugees, Sadruddin Aga Khan. Had no mandate for these Arab refugees because UNRWA had this special mandate in its camps, which meant perpetuation of the refugee problem in situ, frozen in these terrible conditions. Jordan wanted to change that.
Jordan's project was the first attempt by the UN to make a real impact on the humanitarian and political situation in the Middle East. There was talk of scrapping UNRWA, and Jordan was asked to draw up a financial plan for the rehabilitation of Palestinian refugees, to be presented by the end of August 1967 in New York. At the same time, however, Jordan had other pressing problems to solve. Following the Six-Day War, a wave of violent anti-Jewish hysteria swept through the Arab world. Synagogues were burnt down and people killed and maimed. The situation was worst in Egypt, where the entire remaining Jewish population was rounded up and imprisoned. There was no time to waste. We know from surviving records that Jordan found an opportunity to set up clandestine meetings with Arab agents in Eastern Europe.
I was as close to him as anybody. He would never talk. Never talk. I remember when he was in Geneva, he wanted to go to Hungary. They didn't let him in. He went to Romania and then to Prague, to his death. He was going with his wife and his nephew. Trip. Vacation. You know, Charlie, vacation. Look, it's vacation. And I don't know really what he did.
There was one thing that happened in Bucharest. He apparently made an arrangement with someone, and he told me that he was going out to look at somebody's stamp collection. And I said, great, I love stamps, let's go. And he said, no, I'm going alone. And I was upset because I didn't understand that. Why wouldn't he want me to come with him? And it was out of character, completely out of character. And I understood that he wasn't going to look at a stamp collection at all, that he was going to have some meeting with somebody somewhere about Jews. When we were supposed to leave Bucharest, he told me that he couldn't get his visa for Hungary, and that's when we split. We were supposed to go to Hungary, I think, for 3 days, and I think he saw me off at the airport, and then he traveled on to Prague with Ellie.
The Hungarians refused Jordan a visa on the grounds that he was still officially an enemy of the state. But the Czechoslovaks allowed him in, despite, or possibly because of, the fact that they knew all about him and his work. Jordan's trip to Prague was to be his final act on behalf of the Palestinians in the occupied territories and the Jews in Egyptian jails. 3 days after his arrival in Prague, Charles Jordan disappeared.
Tuesday night before I was supposed to go to Prague, I got a call from Charlie. And he said, is everything all right? I said, yes. He said, you're all right getting to the airport? Yes. Well, I'll meet you at the airport tomorrow and pick you up. And the next day I took the plane and I landed in Prague, and he wasn't at the airport. I waited around, looked around, and all of a sudden a man came forth from the crowd dressed in overalls. And he asked me my name, and he said, come with me. And I followed him. He grabbed my bags, and I followed him out of the airport to a pickup truck, which I found extraordinarily odd because, you know, this wasn't a taxi. This wasn't somebody who I could understand was picking me up to bring me to a hotel to my uncle. And where was my uncle anyway?
O tom, že je pohřešovaný americký státní občan Charles Jordan, jsem se dozvěděl 17. srpna.
Miroslav Opravil, born in Czechoslovakia, senior detective in the Jordan investigation, lives in Prague.
To bylo dáno potom následující den do takzvaných denních zpráv, které tedy chodily na všechny útvary bezpečnosti v republice a také na ministerstvo vnitra a pochopitelně i na útvary státní bezpečnosti.
We went off to the hotel, the Esplanade. I got out there, and when I walked in the door, I saw my aunt standing in front of the doorway, the bottom of the stairs, and she was like a stone statue. And I kissed her hello, and she said, "Something's happened to Charlie." She told me that he was missing and that he left the night before and he didn't come back.
Ten případ byl hned od samého začátku, kdy bylo oznámeno, že je Jordan pohřešován, předmětem spekulací tisku, zejména ve Spojených státech. Bylo spekulováno o tom, že Jordan tady byl unesen, že je chystán monster proces špionážní s ním. Bylo vzpomínáno špatných vztahů mezi Československem a Izraelí. Bylo zase vyzdvihovány dobré vztahy mezi Československem a arabskými státy. Zlom nastal za 3 dny 20. srpna, kdy byla nalezena na jezu u Karlova mostu mrtvola neznámého muže. Ta byla nalezena někdy po obědě, snad kolem 13. 14. hodiny. Mrtvola byla vytažena a podle oblečení, popisu, stáří bylo okamžitě usuzováno, že se může jednat o pohřešovaného Jordana.
I got a telephone call that the body was found floating on the river. What's the river Vltava? When I went to sleep, I put in the telephone near my bed. And the telephone was ringing from all places, you know. Sasha, you have to go to Prague for the autopsy.
They asked me to go to the morgue and identify his body, but he had been in the water for some time and his body was bloated. And I had trouble. And I think I didn't want to believe that it was him. What I finally did was I finally asked the attendant there to open his mouth so I could see his teeth because he had a gap in his teeth, in his front teeth. And I asked them to open his mouth, and that was something which shocked me. But there was the gap.
Soudní pitva, ta byla celkem rozhodující pro nás, tak tu prováděl Ústav soudního lékařství v Praze a bylo konstatováno, že příčinou smrti je udušení z utopení. Jakékoliv známky násilí na mrtvole nalezeny nebyly. Nebyly nalezeny ani žádné známky možného vpichu nějakého po injekci nebo podobně.
The autopsy was performed. Also the Czechs agreed to wait that we arrive. So we could only do what we could do. This means examine the organs, the lungs, and one thing could be established that he was drowned. But how he came to the water, the autopsy will never show you. They had the pathologist in Prague had a draft of the report which I have made. And there was written, there's no signs of violence. So I suggested, see, wouldn't it be more accurate to write, given the state of the body, it's difficult to find signs of violence. They agreed.
My samozřejmě jsme zvažovali všechny možnosti. Z toho, co jsme měli k dispozici, no tak jsme museli uvažovat o tom, že buď tedy se jedná o sebevraždu, o nešťastnou náhodu, anebo o vraždu.
The investigation was severely hampered by political factors. The secret police, anxious to protect their own agents, refused to tell detectives all they knew about Jordan. The Americans and Jordan's family were also reluctant to supply the communist authorities with detailed information that they believed would only be used against them.
Ellie's story was that he had gone out after dinner to get either a newspaper or cigarettes or both, and didn't come back. I understand that she didn't ask the authorities for help or report him missing until the next morning around 8 o'clock. I don't know why she waited. I believe that she thought that he was going out to meet somebody. Whether he told her or not, I believe he wouldn't have told her.
As the investigation proceeded, the list of unanswered questions grew. Why had Jordan and his wife been staying in a hotel used by dozens of Arab diplomats and where the Egyptians even rented an office? Why did none of the witnesses see Jordan leave the hotel on that fateful evening? And strangest of all, why was Jordan, who had already made 2 visits to the US Embassy, not being followed by the STB, who kept all foreigners under close surveillance?
Já jsem osobně hovořil s bývalým náčelníkem 4. správy ministerstva vnitra, to byla sledovačka. A řekl mi, že celý ten případ Jordana byl důvodem k umývání hlav na státní bezpečnosti, protože, jak tvrdil, státní bezpečnost se dozvěděla o jeho přítomnosti v Praze až tehdy, kdy bylo oznámeno jeho pohřešování. Do té doby o tom nevěděli a celkem to bylo státní bezpečností vytýkáno, že tedy o tom neměla ani ponětí, protože oni se přihlásili v hotelu, jsou tam nějaké přihlašovací lístky a státní bezpečnost měla ty hotely pod dohledem.
A man like that, I think they would have been following, watching.
Kenneth Skoke, born in the USA, American diplomat, posted to Prague 1964 to 68, lives in the USA.
People are human. They could make mistakes. Even in the Soviet Union, the KGB made some mistakes, losing you know. But it would be very difficult to know. Anyway, visiting the embassy, the cameras would take anybody's picture coming in the embassy. Everybody would be photographed, and Jordan certainly would be.
Within days of Jordan's death, an unknown Arab student organization wrote a letter claiming responsibility. It was handed over to the secret police, who promptly mislaid it. It has never been authenticated, and in fact could have been written by anybody, including the STB themselves.
Čas Jordan byl extremista nebo spíš sionista než Žid. Nevím, pro jakou organizaci spolupracoval nebo pracoval, ale měl dobré vztahy s americkýma Židama nebo americkou zpravodajskou službou. Ale když byli obviněni arabští komanda nebo palestinští komanda, můžu říct, tehdy neexistovali palestinští komanda, aby ho nesli. Neměli na to ani techniku, ani sílu. Jedině některé nejsilnější zpravodajské služby arabské byly egyptské, tak byly Izraele, silné. Ale slyšel jsem taky, on měl dobré vztahy s egyptskou zpravodajskou službou, tak by ho naopak využili a nezlikvidovali. A kdyby ho nesli, by ho vyměnili za 1000 zajatců nebo věznů v Izraeli. Kdyby to dělali arabští komandák, by se to hlasili a dělali ze sebe hrdiny. Druhý den by se to hlasili. Hlavně, aby získali, kdyby to dělali Palestinci, by to hlasali, aby získali velkou podporu masovou, jako mezi arabskými lidmi, nebo jak se říká v arabských ulicích.
Apart from the authors of The Lost Letter, no Arab liberation movement ever claimed responsibility for Jordan's murder. This suggests it was not an act of terrorism, which favours highly visible attacks designed to spread fear and attract publicity, rather than cloak and dagger assassinations. Surprisingly, one claim did come from a Stalinist Jewish group in France, who proudly announced they had been trying to eliminate Jordan, an agent of American imperialism, since 1947.
Kdyby to dělali profesionálové, tak by si počínali asi trochu chytřej, že jo? A té mrtvoly se zbavili tedy jiným způsobem. Ale to hlavní, byl motiv k vraždě? My jsme ho neviděli. Nikde se nám neobjevilo nic, co by mohlo nasvědčovat tomu, že tady k vraždě skutečně došlo.
In the course of the investigation, various false witnesses were produced. There were stories about Jordan's secret past and hints about homosexuality. It was about all the Czechoslovak police had to go on, since most of the actual evidence was being withheld by the West.
A forensic police inquiry was conducted, which was commissioned through the Zurich police. They saw the scuffing on the legs of his trousers, which should have corresponded with abrasions that were found, but no blood stains, because his blood didn't circulate at that point, because he was already dead when he was thrown into the river.
We managed to track down the forensic report in question, which proves clearly that the grazes on Jordan's trousers were made when the material was dry, on a body that was already dead.
Also, certain procedures were done on his lungs and showed traces of chloroform. The Czech authorities at the time tried to discountenance that by saying that the part where his body was found was not far from a dye works in the river downstream, and some of the discharge and the fact that he was floating in the river, his body was floating in the river, may have absorbed some of this what appeared like anesthetic in his lungs.
With the arrival of Soviet tanks in Czechoslovakia in August 1968, all attempts to solve the Jordan case were permanently shelved. The Swiss pathologist who had found traces of chloroform in Jordan's body conveniently committed suicide, apparently by freezing to death. In the post-1968 years of so-called normalization, the Czechoslovak police also closed the case. Miroslav Opravil, the officer who had led the investigation, was sacked.
Případ tím skončil. Já osobně jako kriminalista s tím nemohu být spokojen. Jestli se mě někdo zeptá, jak se ten člověk dostal do Vltavy a mohl se utopit, tak řeknu, že nevím. Nemám důkaz pro žádnou z těch 3 verzí, tak aby mohl říct, je to sebevražda, nešťastná náhoda, anebo vražda.
In a book published in the West in the mid-1970s, a defector from the Czechoslovak secret police named Josef Frolik claimed Jordan had been murdered at the Egyptian embassy in Prague by Palestinian students, secretly assisted by the STB.
Nějaká kombinace, kterou uvádí bývalý pracovník rozvědky komunistické Frolik ve své knize Špion vypovídá, kde tedy jednoznačně konstatuje, že to byla práce nějaké arabské zpravodajské služby a za dohledu a nějaké pomoci státní bezpečnosti a tak dále, která případ sledovala, že teda byl unesen někde v autě. No jistě, někdo mohl Jordana přinutit, aby nastoupil třeba do auta. To nevylučuju. Možné by to bylo, ale pak ho musel znehybnit. Jak? Žádné stopy ani na rukách, nějaké hematomní otlaky a tak dál nalezeny a zjištěny nebyly. A potom, proč tedy nějak složitě tu mrtvolu táhnout až na most a potom ji snášet dolů na Střelecký ostrov a házet do Vltavy, nevím.
Up until 1989, Jordan's death was officially blamed on the Zionist conspiracy that had been behind the Prague Spring of 1968. As with the show trials of the 1950s, the communist regime tried to intimidate an ill-informed public by demonizing Jews as the ubiquitous enemy.
Židovský velkokapitál vytvářel sionismus v 90. letech minulého století.
Sionisté vycházejí ze stejného základu jako například nacisté, pouze z teze o odlišnosti Židů vyvozují opačné závěry.
Propojení zájmu amerického imperialismu a izraelského sionismu. To znamená společná ideologie, nenávist vůči pokroku.
Čistou nordickou rasu vystřídala čistá rasa židovská.
Aby oddělili židovské dělníky od ostatních pracujících.
Za další to zvláštní postavení židovské obce ve Spojených státech, sionistické lobby.
Toto své protiproletářské, v podstatě reakční poslání plní sionismus dosud a neštítí se přitom využívat žádných prostředků.
Po listopadu 89, respektive po roce 90.
Jan Serp, press officer at the Office for Documentation and Investigation of Crimes of Communism.
Velice zajímavý, že se vlastně tato kauza otevřela znova na tehdejší přání palestinské strany. Takže na tu notu, která byla daná ministerstvu zahraničí v tom roce 90, se muselo reagovat. Dostal to konkrétní vyšetřovatel přidělený a ten se tím začal zaobírat. A zase nutno podotknout, kdyby to nebylo otevřené, jak jsme říkali, na základě, já nevím, dejme tomu nějakého zájmu, neřeknu tlaku, zájmu ze zahraničí, takže u nás by s prominutím neštěkl pes.
Because of this official attitude, the Jordan investigation, although technically still ongoing, has never produced any results. In the course of making this film, we have met most of the surviving witnesses, including Arabs named by Josef Frolik as his informants. Many of them entrusted us with information that the Czechoslovak police never had access to. We believe the key to solving the case is the fact that on the 16th of August 1967, not one person saw Charles Jordan leave the Esplanade Hotel, a fact that has been largely overlooked. The receptionist on duty testified that just before Jordan disappeared, he received a call on the hotel's internal phone, which, in addition to the guests' rooms, was also connected to the office rented by the Egyptians. This office had a separate exit to the street. It was also where Ihsan Mohammed Talat worked. Besides being second secretary at the Egyptian embassy, Talat also worked for the Egyptian Secret Service and was under surveillance by the Czechoslovak STB as part of an operation called Spider. The sole purpose of Operation Spider was to monitor and disrupt the activities of Jewish and Zionist organizations. Talat, however, was an Arab. There is only one possible reason why Operation Spider would keep tabs on an Arab. He must have had contacts with Jews or Zionists. We believe that one of those contacts was Charles Jordan, and that both Talat and Jordan were the victims of a double game set up and controlled by the Czechoslovak intelligence service. The Czech agent who was in charge of the operation against Talat is still alive. Now a lawyer, Jezina Helimanová, codename Alice, refused to talk to us. There are many others who could still throw light on Charles Jordan's death, living in the USA, Israel, Egypt, Syria, or in what are now the Czech and Slovak republics. Nearly 40 years on, it is time for them to overcome their fear and speak out. The least we can do to honor the father of refugees is to set the record straight.